welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm on my way home from doing a couple of errands in town and enjoying a really lovely drive out in the sunshine. It's some really nice weather that we've been having lately, and it's very nice to enjoy. Especially out driving in a classic, so that's nice. My quirk of classic car ownership for you today is how we often all really enjoy going to lots of events and having a jam-packed summer or even spring, but we often kind of don't think about the kind of effort that might go into putting those sorts of events on. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into that sort of thing today with today's podcast. So hopefully you enjoy that, and it might spur you to get involved with putting events on, either for your kind of local groups or things like that. So I've recently started doing a little bit more with the Morris Minor Owners Club Young Members, and as part of that I've been organising a couple of events. Towards the end of last year we set up a WhatsApp group for paid members of the Morris Minor Owners Club who were young owners or young enthusiasts, and that chat had been doing really well. Lots of people were really enjoying being able to get to know each other, and so come spring this year they were really all itching to kind of get to know each other and meet each other in person and get to see each other's cars. The problem that I kind of faced initially was working out a date and a location that a group of people who were located across the country could try and get together. And finding something that worked for at least the majority of people was going to be a little bit of a challenge. Luckily there's lots of technology that's available for this sort of thing, and we sent round a kind of survey poll in the group to work out when people would most likely be free to come to the event. And that landed on April the 3rd, so the first Sunday in April. And so then we were looking for a location. Now, working out from where everybody was kind of based in the country, it seemed that kind of around Northampton area-ish would work quite well. So I started looking for places that were going to have nice, secure kind of car parks for people to park their cars up and not be too worried, but also something kind of interesting for us all to kind of display our cars nearby. And that was kind of the really difficult part, because April the 3rd comes this year before Easter. We were struggling to find a lot of little places that we were interested in being open, because a lot of them didn't open until the Easter weekend, which was going to be 3 weekends later. So we emailed a few places, rang around a few places, and eventually I resorted to going on Google Maps and kind of scrolling around in about the area that I knew would work for people and seeing kind of what sort of things came up. And I stumbled across the 306th Bombardment Group Museum at Bedford Airfield, and it was a small little museum that was located on the airfield to commemorate the 306th Bombardment Group. It looked like it had a couple of interesting pieces, and it also, something that's very reassuring when you're trying to organise something like this, is discovering that car groups have been there previously. And on their Facebook page they had a lovely little video of a load of Bond bugs arriving, parking up, and then heading off on their way sometime later. So it looked like it was already a place that was reasonably safe and nice for us to take our cars. So got in contact with the guy that runs it, had a really lovely phone conversation with him, he was very enthusiastic about having a young owners group come, because as I'd worked out, he had quite a few car groups go there, but he'd never kind of heard of a young owners group, and he thought that was a really nice thing to have. So that was quite lovely to hear. And he was so accommodating in terms of what he was going to offer us. Not only were we going to have nice parking, even though they weren't planning on being officially open yet that year, at that time he was happy to come across to the museum and open it up for us for the day. Tea and coffee, biscuits and cakes if we wanted, all kind of included in just turning up. The place runs off donations, so the kind of admin group decided that we would offer a £5 donation as the entrance, and that would then mean that people could make that donation, we could make that donation as a group to the museum for their hospitality, and it also gave us a good idea about the amount of people that were coming. So we knew that things were going to be worth putting on. So we stayed in contact with John at the museum, and he was ever so helpful. Stayed in contact this was from January through to the April, and he even came across a little Morris Minor figurine that, in an antique shop or something, bought it, and suggested that we included kind of within that £5 donation, we give out raffle tickets so that the young members had the chance of not only attending and meeting each other, but winning this beautiful pewter on wood Morris Minor convertible figurine. So we organised all that, and then it was time for the event to happen. And in the week leading up to it, it was really nice to see in the WhatsApp that lots of people were getting quite excited, making sure that they'd done a little bit of maintenance on their cars. For a lot of people in the group, it was the furthest that they'd driven their Morrises. So they were really looking forward to kind of the challenge, although seemingly quite apprehensive for some of them. And it was then time on the Sunday for us all to congregate, which was going to be great. So we had Beth and Basil the dog come and stay over on the Saturday night. Unfortunately, Beth's Morris Minor is off the road at the moment, so she convoyed over with us in her modern, and it took us just over an hour to get to the place. However, there was kind of a vary between an hour up to 3 hours for most people, but it wasn't hopefully much more than that for most people according to Google Maps. Obviously some of that depends on how people are driving their Morris Minors and if they choose to take the scenic route, which one group decided to do and make a big kind of trip of it. And you'll hopefully be able to see kind of details of that little adventure over on the Fat Friars YouTube channel, which I'm sure you're familiar with, as he and 3 friends came down in Jean for the weekend and made a kind of lovely event of it. We'd agreed, given the length of time that it could take some people to get there, to meet at about 10:30 at the museum. It was really quite tucked away in Bedford Airfield. Took quite a lot of driving across the estate once you got into it, but we managed to find it, and we were quite delighted to see when we pulled up there was a collection of American military vehicles from World War II. Apparently there's a group of them locally that regularly meet up at the museum, and John, the guy who runs the museum, had told them that we were coming along, and they wanted to come along, show their support, and also have a nosy at our cars and see if we wanted to have a look at theirs. So that was really nice of them to kind of come along and see what we were up to. And from about 10:30 until probably about 11:15, people were gradually turning up and parking themselves up in a lovely display of Morris Minors and an Austin Maxi, which was instead of the Morris Traveller of Jordan that was off the road. You could tell that people were pretty excited to meet up with each other and finally get to talk to each other in person, and that was helped massively by eventually wandering over a little closer to the museum and being offered lots of very lovely cups of tea that were some of the best cups of tea that I've ever had from John. We all stood round and had a lovely conversation about kind of our trips there, any issues that we'd had. Luckily, most people hadn't. Unfortunately, one car didn't make it because it had decided to have a slight issue on the way there and then had to be recovered on the way home. So that was a shame, but hopefully they're going to make it to some future events because we're hoping to put lots of more events up. So that was kind of the first, it must have been an hour and a half of us all kind of stood around talking. Eventually we took it in turns in small groups to wander around the museum. It wasn't a huge museum, kind of 3 or 4 rooms, but with lots of interesting stuff, and it was definitely packed in there, so you could wander around a couple of times and spot different things each time you walked around, which was quite nice. Whilst I've been in conversations with John before the event, he'd said he thought he had a photo of a Morris Minor in the museum, and given that it is a war-based museum, I thought that was quite unusual, given that the Morris Minors that we'd be arriving in were going to be kind of 1949 onwards style. So he said, well, you'll have to have a look in the museum, see if you can spot what I've labelled as a Morris Minor, and let me know whether it is or if you think it's something else. So I had a lot of fun walking around in the museum trying to spot this, and in the end I had to check in with John and see where it was, and it was in the section about Glenn Miller, where he had got a photo of a car that, to be fair, did from behind look very much like a Morris Minor convertible, but given the dates and things like that, seemed more likely to be a Morris 8E series. So we've advised him that it's more likely that, but he's going to do a bit more research and see what it is. But it was quite interesting to spot that and how similar in this black and white photo the two looked. Oh, another Morris. So following that, we all headed back towards our cars, where there was quite a lot of nice grassy woodland area for us to have our picnic, because we'd all brought along some picnics and were sat down to kind of enjoy those, and at some point one person popped their bonnet, which if you know anything about classic car events, means that everybody's bonnets eventually went up, which made for some lovely photos, but also some interesting discussions, especially as the guys that owned the US military vehicles wandered over to have a nosy and make some comparisons between our engine bays and their much larger engine bays. They had some really interesting discussions with some of the young members, and I think it was quite nice for some of them to be able to talk to people about their cars, as well as kind of each other about their cars. And I'm really grateful to the museum for kind of making the effort to let those guys know that we were coming if they wanted to come along and support us as well. And that really makes such a difference when you're trying to organise this sort of event, in terms of being able to find such an accommodating and interesting location to host an event. Now, unfortunately for some, my picnic seemed to be filled with bright idea fuel, and following the picnic I suggested that we make the most of the half-empty car park, because it was literally just us and 1 or 2 American vehicles at this point, and push each of the Morrises out into a kind of staggered effect to take some interesting group photos. Because typically when people take group photos of their cars, they're kind of stood next to them all lined up. So I thought we could get some different photos and take advantage of the space that we'd kind of been afforded at this event. So that went reasonably well, went down better than expected, and we got them all pushed out for some interesting photos, and made for some good comparisons in terms of kind of lengths and kind of where people's bonnets all lined up. Obviously it was a wee bit harder with the Austin Maxi on the end, because it didn't have exactly the same kind of door gap to make the comparison against. But I think it made for some really lovely photos that hopefully you will have seen if you're a Morris Minor Owners Club member within your copy of Minor Matters, but also I'll pop a few up on screen as well. After this, it was time for more tea, more discussions, and a few of us filming and taking a few photos, more chatting about various things, and then I guess it started to dawn on people that actually we are going to have to head home eventually. But I had planned for there to be kind of the option to drive onto somewhere if people wanted. But what was really nice is that we'd managed to get to kind of 3 o'clock, which was about the time people were quite happy to leave, and we were still kind of chatting and getting to know each other. So again, I think the challenge for me had really been working out what people would want from this first event together, and it turns out that I was right in predicting that primarily people would want to stand round to get to know each other in person, have a nosy at each other's cars. That means that kind of the next event that we're putting on, which will be after this podcast, May the 31st, will be a bit different. We're going to have it at Caffeine and Machine in the hopes of, again, meeting up with some other owners and making some comparisons and good conversations, but also having the opportunity to catch up with each other as well. Again, quite a central location in terms of people's geography, but perhaps a little bit further north to shorten the journeys for some people. And I'm really looking forward to it because I love Caffeine and Machine as a location, and I'm hoping that by taking advantage of their kind of club nights and getting us all parked together, we'll get some really nice photos because it's such a beautiful location. So I hope you've enjoyed kind of my little report on the event for the young members at the beginning of spring. I'm really looking forward to hopefully putting a few more events on with them over the summer, and then trying my hand at some of the NEC stuff, which is a big jump from having kind of only just started going last year. And that's the thing really, if you're interested in classic cars, getting involved in these sorts of things really gives you the opportunity to try honing your skills at putting events on and making fun, interesting things for not only you to enjoy, but lots of other people to hopefully enjoy as well. I'll put the link for the next event for the young members from Facebook in the description of both the Spotify and YouTube. So if you are a young Morris Minor owner and you're interested in getting to know a few more of us before Nationals, then hopefully we'll see you there. But if not, and you're just interested in kind of seeing what we've been up to, then hopefully you've enjoyed today's podcast. In the meantime, drive safely and happy motoring.